The Harrington family seemed perfect from the outside. A beautiful home in the Connecticut suburbs, 2 successful careers, 3 healthy children, neighbors who waved hello on lazy Sunday mornings. But behind closed doors, beneath the veneer of domestic bliss, something dark was growing in the heart of Elaine Harrington, something that would eventually consume her entire world in a single night of unfathomable violence. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What drives an ordinary woman to commit an extraordinary act of brutality against those she once loved? What hidden forces transform a devoted mother into someone capable of unspeakable rage? And how does a marriage built on 15 years of shared dreams dissolve into the ultimate nightmare? The morning of April 12th began like any other in the Harrington household. Elaine woke at 5:30 a.m., precisely 30 minutes before her husband Richard's alarm would sound. The early dawn light filtered through the expensive blackout curtains they'd purchased during their kitchen renovation the previous summer. She slid out from beneath the Egyptian cotton sheets, careful not to disturb him, a habit from years of marriage that had become instinctual rather than a genuine act of consideration. At 42, Elaine maintained the disciplined routine that had served her well throughout her career as a pharmaceutical sales executive. 20 minutes on the Peloton, 10 minutes of meditation, a quick shower. By 6:15, she was already dressed in tailored navy slacks and a cream blouse, applying a minimal amount of makeup at her vanity while Richard shuffled toward the bathroom, mumbling about an early meeting at the investment firm where he'd worked since before they were married. "Can you make sure Emma has her science project?" Richard called out from the shower. "And Tyler needs lunch money. I meant to stop at the ATM yesterday." "Already handled," Elaine replied, though she hadn't known about either task until that moment. She'd fix it. She always did. Downstairs, Maria Delgado was already preparing breakfast. The Harringtons had hired her 3 years ago when their youngest, 6-year-old Sophie, had started kindergarten, and Elaine had taken on more travel responsibilities at work. Maria was in her early 30s, a first-generation American with Salvadoran parents who had moved to the Northeast for better opportunities. She lived in a small apartment in the less affluent part of town and came to the Harrington home 5 days a week to cook, clean, and help with childcare when needed. "Good morning, Mrs. Harrington," Maria said, her voice carrying a warmth that Elaine tried to match in her response. There had always been something genuine about Maria that made everyone feel immediately comfortable, everyone except Elaine, who found herself increasingly restless in the younger woman's presence over the past few months. "Did you sleep well?" Maria asked as she placed a cup of perfectly brewed coffee on the counter. The question was simple, casual, but Elaine noted how Maria's eyes darted toward the staircase, waiting for Richard's descent. "Fine, thank you," Elaine replied, sipping her coffee while scanning through emails on her phone. 43 new messages. Since midnight, a pharmaceutical sales executive's work never ended, especially when your territory covered 3 states and your bonus was tied to quarterly performance. By 7:15, the kitchen had transformed into controlled chaos. 16-year-old Tyler wolfed down pancakes, while simultaneously arguing with 14-year-old Emma about whose turn it was to use the shared bathroom upstairs. Sophie sat at her designated spot, meticulously spreading peanut butter on toast. Her small face contorted in concentration. Maria moved effortlessly through the space, anticipating needs before they were voiced, refilling juice glasses and packing lunches with practiced efficiency. Richard entered last, his 6-foot frame dominating the kitchen doorway. At 45, he had managed to avoid the middle-age spread that claimed many of his colleagues. Tennis 3 times a week and a personal trainer on Thursdays had maintained his athletic build. His dark hair showed distinguished touches of silver. At the temples, something Elaine had once found attractive, but now viewed as another piece of his carefully cultivated image. "Morning, everyone," he announced, his eyes landing briefly on Maria before addressing the children. "Tyler, don't forget basketball practice is cancelled today. I'll pick you up at the regular time." Elaine's phone buzzed with a notification from her calendar app. "I have that dinner with the Kesslers tonight. Can you make sure Sophie practices piano?" And she asked Richard, who was now inspecting the contents of his travel mug. "Actually, I have that client dinner, remember? The one I mentioned last week, with Anderson's group?" Elaine didn't remember, but nodded anyway. Another night of juggling, schedules, and feeling the weight of domestic management on her shoulders despite their supposed partnership. "I'll ask my mother to come over," she said, already composing the text in her head. "I can stay late," Maria offered, looking directly at Richard. "It's no problem." "That would be great," Richard replied quickly. "Thanks, Maria." Elaine watched the exchange without comment, noting the slight flush that appeared on Maria's neck. Something cold and uneasy settled in her stomach, the same feeling that had been growing for weeks now. She pushed it aside and focused on the logistics of the day ahead. By 7:40, Elaine was in her Audi, navigating toward the highway for her meeting in Hartford. Richard had taken the kids to school in his Range Rover, and Maria was left alone in the house, a routine so normal that no one questioned it anymore. The Bedford Pharmaceutical Regional Office hummed with pre-meeting energy when Elaine arrived. At 8:45, as Senior Sales Director, she commanded respect from the moment she entered, her colleagues deferring to her expertise and experience. Here, unlike at home, her authority was never questioned. She had earned every promotion through relentless hard work and strategic thinking, qualities that her boss, Regional VP Stanley Collins, had recognized early in her career. "The Q2 numbers are looking strong," Stanley mentioned as they walked toward the conference room. "Your territory is outperforming projections by 18%. Whatever you're doing, keep it up." Elaine nodded, accepting the praise without revealing how much it had cost her. The late nights, the missed soccer games, the meals are eaten alone in hotel rooms while FaceTiming her children to say goodnight. Success required sacrifice, a mantra she had internalized so completely that she rarely questioned it anymore. The meeting progressed efficiently under Elaine's guidance. She presented the new marketing strategy for their flagship antidepressant, fielded questions about physician resistance, and outlined target growth for the coming quarter. This was where she excelled, in the details, the planning, the flawless execution of complex strategies. If only family life could be managed with the same clarity of purpose. During the lunch break, Elaine checked her phone and found 3 text messages waiting. From Tyler, "Need $50 for a jersey. Dad forgot." From Emma, "Science fair tomorrow. Need poster board tonight." From Richard, "Running late. Meeting went long. Can Maria stay with kids until you get home?" She responded to each methodically, then added a 4th text to Maria confirming the extended hours. Maria's reply came instantly. "No problem. Happy to help. Taking chicken out of the freezer for dinner." The remainder of the workday passed in a blur of spreadsheets, conference calls, and strategy sessions. By the time Elaine left the office at 6:20, the tension between her shoulder blades had formed into a tight knot. The 40-minute drive home would at least give her time to decompress, to shift from corporate warrior back to mother and wife, roles that required entirely different parts of herself. The Harrington home was located in Millfield, an affluent suburb where property values remained stable even through economic downturns, and where the public schools rivaled many private institutions. Their house, a modernized colonial with 5 bedrooms and a recently renovated kitchen, sat on nearly an acre of professionally landscaped property. It was the physical manifestation of their success, the reward for years of strategic career moves and careful financial planning. As Elaine pulled into the driveway at 7:10, she noticed Richard's car was still absent. The client's dinner she remembered, though something about his earlier explanation felt incomplete. She pushed the thought away and collected her belongings from the passenger seat. Inside, the house smelled of garlic and roasted chicken. Maria was at the stove, stirring something in a large pot, while Sophie sat at the kitchen island with homework spread before her. Tyler and Emma's voices carried from the family room, engaged in their usual bickering over television choices. "Mrs. Errington, dinner is almost ready," Maria said, her smile bright and welcoming. "I made Mr. Harrington's favorite, the roast chicken with those potatoes he likes." "Thank you, Maria," Elaine replied, setting down her laptop bag and briefcase. "You didn't have to cook. I could have picked something up." "It's no trouble. I enjoy cooking for your family. Your family." The phrase echoed in Elaine's mind as she moved through the kitchen toward the refrigerator. She poured herself a glass of Chardonnay, noticing that the bottle was already open. Maria didn't drink, as far as Elaine knew. "Did Richard stop home earlier?" she asked casually. Maria turned her attention back to the stove. "Yes, just for a little while. He forgot some papers for his meeting. He said not to wait for dinner for him." Elaine nodded, taking a long sip of wine. "Kids, dinner in 5 minutes. Wash up," she called, slipping effortlessly into the maternal role that waited for her each evening. Dinner proceeded without Richard, a circumstance that had become increasingly common over the past year. Elaine listened as the children shared details from their day. Tyler's frustration with his calculus teacher, Emma's drama club politics, Sophie's playground triumph at tetherball. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Maria moved around them, refilling water glasses and offering seconds, her presence both helpful and increasingly unsettling to Elaine. After dinner, Maria helped with the dishes while Elaine supervised homework and signed permission slips. As the evening routine progressed, Elaine checked her watch repeatedly, noting that Richard's client dinner was extending well past a reasonable business meal. At 9:45, with the children in bed and homework checked, Elaine thanked Maria for staying late. "It's really no problem, Mrs. Harrington," Maria said, as she gathered her purse and light jacket. "I'm happy to help any time." "You're very good with the children," Elaine observed, walking Maria to the door. "They respond well to you." Maria smiled, a hint of sadness touching her eyes. "They're wonderful children. You and Mr. Harrington have done a good job raising them." The compliment should have warmed Elaine, but instead it created a strange hollowness in her chest, as if Maria had offered insight into a family dynamic that Elaine herself was losing connection with. After Maria left, Elaine poured another glass of wine and moved through the quiet house, turning off lights and locking doors. In Sophie's room, she adjusted the unicorn nightlight that kept the monsters away. In Emma's, she picked up discarded clothes from the floor, a task that would have resulted in an argument had her daughter been awake. In Tyler's room, she simply stood in the doorway, watching her firstborn sleep, marveling at how quickly 16 years had passed. Downstairs again, Elaine settled onto the living room sofa with her laptop, intending to prepare for tomorrow's presentation. Instead, she found herself scrolling through family photos on her phone, images capturing birthdays, vacations, ordinary moments that strung together created the narrative of the Harrington family. In every picture, they looked happy, connected. Real. Was it real? The question surfaced unbidden, bringing with it a wave of unease that Elaine had become adept at suppressing. When had Richard last looked at her the way he had in those early photos? When had their conversations shifted from dreams and desires to schedules and logistics? At 11:30, the sound of Richard's key in the front door pulled Elaine from her thoughts. She closed her laptop and listened as he moved through the entryway. The familiar rhythm of his actions, keys on the hook, shoes in the closet, briefcase on the bench, providing a counterpoint to the questions swirling in her mind. "You're still up," he said, appearing in the living room doorway. His tie was loosened, the top button of his shirt undone. He looked tired but energized in a way that late-night business dinners rarely produced. "How was Anderson dinner?" Elaine asked, watching his face for micro-expressions she'd become attuned to over 15 years of marriage. "Productive. We're close to finalizing the deal." He moved to the bar cart and poured himself a whiskey. "Did Maria stay late?" "I meant to text." "She did. Everything was fine here." Elaine took a sip of wine, studying him over the rim of her glass. "She made your favorite chicken." "That was thoughtful of her," Richard said, his voice carefully neutral. "She's been a real asset." Elaine nodded slowly. "She has." Richard settled into the armchair across from her, loosening his tie further. "How was your meeting in Hartford?" "Good. We're outperforming projections." Elaine set down her wine glass. "Richard, is there something we should talk about?" His expression shifted subtly, a tightening around the eyes, a momentary freeze before his features relaxed again. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. You tell me." She held his gaze steadily. "You've been working late a lot. Client dinners, weekend meetings. Is everything okay at the firm?" Relief washed over his face. "Everything's fine at work, just busy with the Anderson acquisition. You know how it is. When opportunity comes, you have to be available." Available. The word hung between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. "I know exactly how it is," Elaine replied, rising from the sofa. "I'm heading to bed. I have an early call tomorrow." Richard nodded, making no move to join her. "I'll be up soon. Just want to finish this drink and decompress." Upstairs, Elaine went through her nighttime routine mechanically, face washed, teeth brushed, skin moisturized. In the master bathroom, she opened the medicine cabinet for her sleeping pill and noticed Richard's cologne bottle was nearly empty. She'd given him that cologne for Christmas, and he rarely wore it, except for special client meetings. In bed, Elaine stared at the ceiling, counting the turns of the ceiling fan as it rotated above her. One revolution after another, predictable and constant, unlike the shifting ground beneath her marriage. Eventually, she heard Richard's footsteps on the stairs, followed by his quiet movements in the bathroom. When he finally slid into bed beside her, she kept her breathing deep and regular, pretending to be asleep. He didn't reach for her. He hadn't reached for her in months. As Elaine drifted toward actual sleep, one thought crystallizes in her mind. Something was very wrong in the Harrington household, and it had been wrong for much longer than she'd been willing to admit. The next morning followed the same pattern. Elaine rising first, the children's chaotic breakfast, Richard's late arrival to the kitchen. But today, Elaine noticed details that her busy mind usually filtered out: how Maria's hand lingered when passing Richard his coffee mug, the way Richard's eyes followed Maria as she moved around the kitchen, the almost imperceptible touch of fingers when a plate was passed. Tiny moments, invisible to children, focused on their own morning dramas, but blindingly clear to a wife who had spent 15 years studying the man she had married. "I might be home early today," Elaine announced as she gathered her keys. "My afternoon meeting might get cancelled." Richard glanced up from his phone, a flicker of something, concern, annoyance, crossing his face. "Oh? I thought you had that presentation for the new product launch." "That's tomorrow," Elaine lied smoothly, watching his reaction. "Today's the Collins review, but he's having car trouble, so we might reschedule." Got it, Richard nodded, returning to his phone. I'll be working late again. The Anderson team wants to review the final projections. Elaine smiled, the expression not reaching her eyes. Of course they do. The workday passed in a haze of distraction. Elaine went through the motions, the calls, the emails, the strategy discussions, while part of her mind remained fixed on the subtle interactions she'd witnessed that morning. By 2 p.m., she had made a decision. She texted her assistant that she was feeling unwell and would work from home for the remainder of the day. Then she texted Richard that her meetings were running long and she might be late. At 2:45, Elaine parked her Audi a block away from her house and walked the remaining distance, her heart hammering against her ribs. She entered through the side door, the one that led directly to the laundry room, using her key to unlock it silently. The house was quiet, except for the distant sound of the upstairs vacuum cleaner, Maria cleaning the bedrooms, as she did every Wednesday afternoon. Elaine moved through the house like a ghost, noting that nothing seemed out of place. In the kitchen, lunch dishes were washed and put away. In the family room, cushions were perfectly arranged. Everything was as it should be in the Harrington home, orderly, predictable, controlled, until she heard the front door open. Elaine froze, then quickly stepped into the small powder room off the kitchen hallway, leaving the door slightly ajar. Through the crack she watched as Richard entered, looking nothing like a man who should be at his office preparing for an important client meeting. "Maria," he called out, his voice carrying up the staircase. The vacuum stopped. Footsteps padded. Across the upstairs hallway, then down the stairs. Maria appeared, her face transforming from surprise to something else entirely when she saw Richard standing in the foyer. "Mr. Harrington," she said, her voice soft and intimate in a way Elaine had never heard before. "I didn't expect you home so early." Richard moved toward her with purpose, his body language entirely different from the carefully maintained professional demeanor he presented to the world. "I couldn't wait until tonight," he said, reaching for her. "I've been thinking about you all day." Elaine's world narrowed to the sliver of vision through the bathroom door, just enough to see her husband pull their maid into an embrace that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Their kiss was passionate, familiar, the kind of kiss that spoke of an established connection rather than a new infatuation. "What about Mrs. Harrington?" Maria asked when they separated, though her hands remained on Richard's chest, making no real effort to create distance. "Working late," Richard replied, his hands moving to Maria's waist. "She won't be home until after 7. We have time." Elaine's body seemed to separate from her mind as she watched them move toward the staircase, toward the master bedroom she shared with Richard. She didn't follow. She didn't need to see more to understand what had been happening in her home while she built her career, raised their children, and maintained the facade of their perfect life. Instead, she slipped out the same side door she had entered, walked back to her car, and sat behind the wheel, her hands gripping the leather so tightly that her knuckles turned white. For nearly an hour, she remained there, perfectly still, as something fundamental shifted within her. It wasn't just betrayal. It wasn't even the humiliation of being deceived in her own home by her husband and a woman she had trusted with her children. It was the sudden, crystal-clear realization that the life she had sacrificed for, the marriage, the family image, the balanced act of career woman and devoted mother, had been built on illusions she had willingly accepted. At 4:30, Elaine started her car and drove to the office, where she worked mechanically until 7:15, responding to emails and finalizing presentations as if her personal world hadn't just imploded. When she finally returned home, Richard's car was gone, off to his fictional client dinner, and Maria had already left for the day. The children were absorbed in their own activities, unaware of the seismic shift that had occurred beneath the foundation of their family. Elaine moved through the evening routine with robotic efficiency, helping with homework, signing forms, listening to Sophie's reading with appropriate encouragement, all while a storm gathered inside her, dark and powerful and growing with each passing moment. Later, after the children were asleep, Elaine opened her laptop and began to research. Vacation properties under her name only, offshore accounts, options for a woman in her position. On the surface, she was simply a wronged wife considering her next steps. But deep within, where the primal instincts of protection and retribution merged into something darker, Elaine Harrington was transforming into someone else entirely. Someone capable of far more than her husband could possibly imagine. Over the next 3 weeks, Elaine Harrington became an actress in her own life. She maintained the morning routines, attended the corporate meetings, and prepared family dinners with mechanical precision. But beneath the veneer of normalcy, she was meticulously documenting every inconsistency in Richard's schedule, every unexplained absence, every transparent lie. She installed a discreet app on her phone that tracked the household Wi-Fi usage, revealing that Richard's phone frequently connected to their network during hours he claimed to be at the office. She reviewed credit card statements, finding charges at restaurants in town on days he'd told her he was having dinner with clients in the city. And most damning, she discovered text messages between Richard and Maria, hundreds of them, when she accessed their family's cellular account online. The messages ranged from mundane household coordination to explicit exchanges that made Elaine's stomach clench. What struck her most wasn't the sexual content, but the emotional intimacy they shared. Inside jokes, future plans, complaints about Elaine herself. In one particularly painful exchange, Richard had written, "Sometimes I feel like Maria is the only one who really sees me." The betrayal had roots deeper than simple lust. This wasn't just an affair. It was a parallel relationship flourishing under her own roof, fed by her trust and enabled by her demanding career. On a Tuesday morning in early May, Elaine sat in her parked car outside a nondescript office building, 30 miles from home. The brass plaque beside the entrance read, "Bradford and Associates Financial Consultants." She had an appointment with Carolyn Bradford at 9:30 a.m., a meeting scheduled under the pretense of retirement planning, but with an entirely different purpose. "Mrs. Harrington," Carolyn greeted her in the reception area, extending a well-manicured hand. "Please come in." Carolyn's office was tastefully decorated in muted blues and greys, with credentials displayed strategically on the walls. Harvard, MBA, certified financial planner, divorce financial analyst. It was this last qualification that had brought Elaine to her door. "Before we begin," Elaine said once they were seated, "I should clarify that I'm not here about retirement planning." Carolyn nodded, unsurprised. "Many of my clients initially come in under different pretenses. Whatever you share stays confidential." Elaine took a deep breath. "I need to understand my options if I decide to leave my husband." For the next hour, Elaine outlined her financial situation with the same precision she used in pharmaceutical sales presentations. Joint accounts, investment portfolios, retirement funds, real estate holdings, insurance policies. Carolyn took meticulous notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but offering no judgments. "Based on what you've shared, you're in a stronger position than many women in your situation," Carolyn said when Elaine finished. "Your career provides you with independent income and credentials for future employment. The question is what you want your life to look like after divorce." "I want security for my children," Elaine replied immediately, "and I want Richard to face consequences for his actions." Carolyn's expression remained professional but softened slightly. "The legal system isn't designed for moral justice, Mrs. Harrington. It's designed to divide assets and establish ongoing obligations. As for the children, courts generally favor shared custody arrangements unless there are extenuating circumstances, such as documented abuse, substance addiction, criminal behavior, abandonment. Carolyn leaned forward slightly. An affair, while painful, doesn't typically impact custody decisions. Elaine absorbed this information silently, her mind calculating possibilities like complex pharmaceutical formulas. What if assets were moved before filing, hypothetically speaking? Carolyn's expression turned cautionary. Courts take a dim view of hiding assets. Discovery processes are thorough. I'd strongly advise against any actions that could be interpreted as financial deception. Elaine nodded, already dismissing certain options from her mental list. And timing. When would be optimal to initiate proceedings? They discussed strategic considerations, financial quarters, bonus schedules, school calendars, weighing each factor with analytical detachment. By the time the meeting concluded, Elaine had a preliminary roadmap for dismantling her marriage with minimal financial damage. What remained unclear was how to minimize the emotional devastation for her children. That afternoon, instead of returning to the office, Elaine drove to Lakeside Park, a quiet recreation area 20 minutes from home. She parked in the nearly empty lot and walked to a bench overlooking the water. Spring was transitioning to summer, and the new foliage created a green canopy overhead. In another life, she might have appreciated the tranquility. She pulled out her phone and opened the gallery app, scrolling to photos from Sophie's birthday party last month. The images showed a smiling family gathered around a unicorn cake. Tyler pretending teenage disinterest while secretly enjoying the celebration. Emma helping her little sister blow out candles. Richard with his arm around Elaine's waist, the picture of devoted fatherhood. In one photo, Maria stood in the background, watching the family with what Elaine had once interpreted as professional attentiveness, but now recognized as longing. Had the affair already begun then? How long had she been the unwitting third point in this triangle? A notification interrupted her thoughts. A text from Richard. Meeting running late. Can you handle dinner? We'll try to make it home before bedtime. Elaine stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the screen. The old Elaine would have replied with reassurance and would have rearranged her own schedule to accommodate his absence. But that Elaine was dissolving, replaced by someone who saw the message for what it was, another lie in a tapestry of deception. She typed, "Fine. Where are you meeting?" His response came quickly. Downtown, Anderson team again, finalizing contract details. She knew it was false. The Anderson deal had closed last week. She'd overheard him on the phone with his colleague bragging about the commission. Another lie, so casual it was almost insulting in its transparency. "Have a good meeting," she replied, then set her phone down beside her on the bench. A flock of geese glided across the lake's surface, leaving V-shaped ripples in their wake. Elaine watched them with hollow fascination, her mind turning over options with the same strategic analysis she applied to market penetration problems at work. Divorce was the obvious path. Clean, legally sanctioned, socially acceptable. But divorce meant shared custody. It meant watching her children pack overnight bags every weekend, meant Sophie crying for her father, meant Richard and Maria potentially playing house with the children she had carried inside her body. It meant Richard walking away with half their assets and a younger woman by his side, while she rebuilt her life amid the whispers of neighbors who had always found her too ambitious, too absent. A different possibility began to form, one so extreme she could only approach it hypothetically at first, a thought experiment rather than a plan. What if there was another way to sever the marriage entirely, a way that left her in control of the narrative, the assets, the children's futures? The idea should have horrified her. The fact that it didn't was perhaps the first indication of how profoundly Elaine Harrington had already changed. She arrived home at 6:15 p.m. to find Maria helping Emma with a social studies project at the kitchen table. The familiar domestic scene, once a relief to Elaine on her busy days, now felt like an obscene invasion. This woman, who smiled so warmly at her daughter while secretly sleeping with her husband, had no right to this intimacy. "Mrs. Harrington," Maria greeted her, standing up. "I've prepared chicken parmesan for dinner. It's kept warm in the oven." "Thank you, Maria," Elaine replied, her voice perfectly modulated to reveal nothing of her inner turmoil. "You can go home now. I'll take over." A flicker of disappointment crossed Maria's face, so brief anyone else might have missed it. "Mr. Harrington asked if I could stay until he got home, to help with the children's homework." Of course he had. Another opportunity for them to be together under the guise of household responsibilities. "That won't be necessary," Elaine said firmly. "I've adjusted my schedule to be home earlier today." Maria hesitated, clearly conflicted between Richard's request and Elaine's dismissal. Emma looked up from her project, sensing the tension but not understanding its source. "Mom, Maria was helping me with my poster board," Emma said. "I'm not done yet." Elaine breathed deeply, reminding herself that her daughter was an innocent party in this twisted dynamic. "I can help you finish it, sweetheart. Maria has worked a full day already." Maria gathered her belongings, moving with the efficiency of someone who knew the home intimately. "I left dinner instructions on the counter," she said. "Sophie already finished her reading log. Tyler has a math test tomorrow he should study for." Elaine nodded, fighting the urge to scream at this woman for knowing so much about her children's lives, for caring about them while simultaneously destroying their family, for the audacity to stand in her kitchen and pretend concern. As Maria reached the back door, Elaine called after her with calculated casualness. "Oh, Maria, would you be available this Saturday? Richard and I are attending a charity event and will need someone with the children." Maria turned, surprised, and something else, was it excitement, briefly animating her features. "Of course, Mrs. Harrington. What time should I arrive?" "Around 6. We'll be late, so you'll need to stay overnight in the guest room." "That's no problem at all," Maria agreed, her eyes not quite meeting Elaine's. They both knew Richard would ensure he found a way to see her during those hours, even at a charity event. After Maria left, Elaine moved through the kitchen with quiet purpose, serving dinner and engaging with her children's stories from school. She monitored their homework, signed permission slips, approved outfit choices for the following day, all while part of her mind remained detached, analyzing her own actions as if observing a stranger. When Sophie asked when Daddy would be home, Elaine answered truthfully, "I don't know, sweetie. He's very busy at work." Richard finally arrived at 9:40 p.m., long after the younger children were in bed. He found Elaine in the home office, reviewing financial documents she'd gathered throughout the day. "Sorry I'm so late," he said, loosening his tie. "The Anderson deal has complications we didn't anticipate." Elaine didn't look up from her paperwork. "The Anderson deal closed last week. You told Brad Jenkins it was in the bag, and you were celebrating the commission." Richard froze momentarily before recovery smoothed his features. "That was the preliminary agreement. There are still contract details to finalize." "Of course," Elaine replied, finally meeting his gaze. "How thoughtless of me to misunderstand." Something in her tone must have alerted him, because wariness crept into his expression. "Is everything okay? You seem different." Elaine smiled thinly. "Everything's fine. I'm just tired." She closed the folder in front of her. "By the way, I told Maria we need her Saturday night for the Westbrook Foundation Gala. She'll stay over to watch the kids." Relief visibly washed over Richard's face at this apparent return to normal domestic planning. "Great! What time should I be ready?" 7:30. The event starts at 8. Elaine stood, gathering her papers. "I'm going to bed. I have an early conference call." As she passed him in the doorway, Richard reached for her arm, an overture that weeks ago might have been welcome. "Elaine, wait. We barely talk anymore." She looked pointedly at his hand until he released her. "What would you like to talk about, Richard? Work, the children, the weather?" Confusion furrowed his brow. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm tired," she repeated, this time with a finality that closed the conversation. "Good night." Upstairs, Elaine locked the bathroom door and turned on the shower to mask any sounds. Then she methodically emptied the contents of her stomach into the toilet, her body finally rebelling against the strain of maintaining appearances. When she finished, she rinsed her mouth and stared at her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back seemed simultaneously familiar and foreign, like viewing an old photograph of herself and recognizing the features while feeling disconnected from the moment captured. That night, lying rigidly beside Richard's sleeping form, Elaine made her decision. Divorce was too messy, too prolonged, too uncontrollable. It would leave Richard and Maria free to build a new life with her children as part-time participants. It would divide the assets she had worked so hard to accumulate. It would brand her as the failed wife, the career woman who couldn't keep her husband interested. No, there had to be another way, a solution as clinical and decisive as the strategies she developed for market domination in her professional life. By morning, the nebulous idea that had formed at the lake had crystallized into something horrifyingly specific. The next 3 days passed in a strange dichotomy of external normalcy and internal preparation. Elaine attended meetings, cooked meals, helped with homework, all while researching untraceable purchases, studying the effects of various substances, and calculating the precise timeline required for her plan. She visited a pharmacy 30 miles from home and purchased items that individually raised no concerns: sleeping aids, cleaning products, rubber gloves. She withdrew cash in small amounts from different ATMs, careful to stay below reporting thresholds. She researched security camera blind spots in their home system and timed the intervals between the neighborhood patrol cars' rounds. Most importantly, she studied Richard and Maria's communications pattern, identifying when they exchanged messages and when they were likely to meet. The invitation to stay overnight Saturday had been calculated. Maria's expectation of seeing Richard would make her more likely to accept a drink when offered, more likely to let her guard down in the Harrington home. On Friday afternoon, Elaine left work early and drove to a motel off the interstate, paying cash for a room she never intended to use. In the parking lot, she changed from her business attire into clothes purchased from a thrift store: jeans, sweatshirt, generic sneakers. She pulled her hair into a tight bun and added a baseball cap and sunglasses before driving to a hunting supply store in the next county. The middle-aged man behind the counter barely glanced at her as she purchased a hunting knife, explaining it was a gift for her father's birthday. She added a cleaning kit and sharpening stone to strengthen the narrative. The entire transaction took less than 15 minutes, with no ID required, in a state with minimal restrictions on knife purchases. Back in her car, Elaine placed the knife in a gym bag, already containing the other items she'd assembled throughout the week. The weight of the bag seemed disproportionate to its size, as if the intentions it contained added physical mass. At home, she hid the bag in the back of her closet behind winter coats and proceeded with dinner preparation as if it were any normal Friday evening. When Richard announced he needed to work late again, she nodded without comment, watching as he exchanged a glance with Maria that confirmed their plans once Elaine was safely out of the way. That evening, after the children were asleep, Elaine sat in the darkened kitchen with a glass of wine, mentally rehearsing each step of tomorrow's sequence. The charity gala provided perfect cover, a public appearance together, witnesses who would see them leave as a couple, a reason for Maria to be in their home overnight. All the elements aligned like components in a pharmaceutical formula, each serving a specific purpose in the final reaction. The only variable she couldn't fully control was her own resolve. Could she actually follow through? The question lingered as she traced the rim of her wineglass with one finger, imagining the alternative futures sprawling before her. In one future, she proceeded with divorce. She would retain her career but lose half the assets. The children would shuttle between homes, vulnerable to Richard and Maria's influence. The neighbors would whisper about the failed marriage. Sophie would cry for her father at bedtime. In the other future, the one requiring unimaginable action, she would face different challenges but maintain complete control. The children would remain exclusively hers. The assets would stay intact. The narrative would be one of tragedy rather than humiliation. And Richard and Maria would never again betray anyone's trust. The stark pragmatism of this calculation should have disturbed her more than it did. The Elaine Harrington of a month ago would have been horrified by these thoughts. But that woman had died the moment she watched her husband kiss their maid at the foot of the staircase. This new Elaine operated by different rules, rules governed by primal instincts of protection, possession, and retribution. As midnight approached, Elaine rinsed her wineglass and placed it in the dishwasher, moving with the same efficiency that had made her successful in every other aspect of life. She checked the locks, set the alarm system, and climbed the stairs to the bedroom where Richard was already asleep, oblivious to the shift in his wife's fundamental nature. Tomorrow would unfold according to plan. The charity gala, the return. Home, the carefully orchestrated sequence of events that would transform the Harrington family forever. Elaine slipped into bed beside her husband for one of the last times, her mind finally quiet as the decision solidified into absolute certainty. The perfect family would remain perfect in public memory. And Elaine would ensure no one, especially not Richard and Maria, would ever threaten that image again. Saturday morning dawned with unseasonable clouds gathering on the horizon, a meteorological reflection of the darkness brewing within Elaine Harrington. The weather forecast predicted thunderstorms by evening, perfect cover for the events she had orchestrated with pharmaceutical precision. She rose at her usual 5:30 a.m., despite it being a weekend. Old habits persisted, even as new intentions formed. In the dim light of early morning, she checked the gym bag once more, verifying each item's presence like a surgeon confirming instruments before an operation. The knife, still in its packaging. The gloves, pharmaceutical grade rather than household. Rubber. The sleeping tablets, crushed to fine powder and stored in a small mint tin. Everything in its place, ready for deployment. Elaine sealed the bag and returned it to its hiding place before heading downstairs. The house remained quiet. The children still asleep after Friday night activities had kept them up late. She prepared coffee and settled at the kitchen island with her laptop, ostensibly reviewing work emails, but actually confirming the final details of her plan. Richard appeared in the kitchen doorway at 8:15, hair damp from the shower, weekend, casual in jeans and a light sweater. "You're up early," he observed, pouring himself coffee. "Quarter-end reports don't write themselves," she replied, the familiar excuse flowing easily. "What time is your golf game?" "Tea time's at 9. Should be back around 1. He glanced at his watch. "The gala starts at 8, right? Cocktails at 7, dinner at 8. Elaine kept her eyes on her laptop screen. Maria confirmed she's arriving at 6. A flicker of something, anticipation, guilt, crossed Richard's face at the mention of Maria's name. Good. The kids will be fine with her overnight if we stay late. I've already told her we might not be back until morning. Elaine's voice remained neutral, concealing the calculated nature of this statement. "The Thompsons invited us for brunch tomorrow after the gala. I said we'd try to make it. This was a fabrication. There was no invitation from the Thompsons, but it established their expected absence from home until Sunday morning, creating the window Elaine required." "Sounds good." Richard sipped his coffee, clearly pleased with the arrangement that would give him opportunities to slip away during both the gala and the fictional brunch. "I'll make sure my tux is ready." After Richard left for golf, Elaine occupied the children with breakfast and weekend activities. She took Tyler to his baseball practice, watched Sophie's dance class, and helped Emma prepare for an upcoming science competition. Each interaction felt heightened, infused with a strange poignancy as she mentally catalogued these ordinary moments with her children, the last normal day before everything changed. By late afternoon, the sky had darkened considerably, and the first distant rumbles of thunder could be heard. Elaine stood at the master bedroom window, watching lightning flicker on the horizon while Richard showered in the ensuite bathroom. The storm's approach felt synchronized with her own internal timeline, nature providing dramatic accompaniment to the evening's planned events. "The Westbrooks always throw the best galas," Richard commented as he emerged from the bathroom wrapped in a towel. "Last year they raised over $2 million for children's cancer research." Elaine nodded absently, her attention fixed on the storm clouds. "Yes, very impressive." "You should wear the blue gown," Richard suggested, moving to his closet. "The one from the Morgan fundraiser last fall. You looked stunning in it." The compliment, rare in recent months, registered as hollow manipulation. Richard was in high spirits, anticipating a night that would include both the social status enhancement of the gala and stolen moments with Maria. Elaine wondered if they had already arranged their rendezvous points for the evening. "I was thinking of the black Valentino," she replied. The dress she'd selected was deliberately striking, memorable enough that attendees would later recall her appearance with perfect clarity. At precisely 6 p.m., the doorbell rang. Maria arrived wearing a modest dress rather than her usual work clothes, her overnight bag slung over one shoulder. The children greeted her enthusiastically, already planning the movies they would watch and the snacks they would consume during this rare parental absence. Elaine observed this interaction from the staircase, noting how naturally Maria fit into their family dynamic. In another reality, one where Maria hadn't crossed unforgivable boundaries, she might have been the ideal caregiver for the Harrington children. The waste of this potential relationship added another layer to Elaine's resolve. "The emergency numbers are on the refrigerator," Elaine instructed as she descended the stairs. "Sophie needs her medication at 7:30. No screen time after 10, Bashand. For any of them, even though it's Saturday." "Of course, Mrs. Harrington." Maria nodded, her eyes briefly darting to the top of the staircase where Richard was emerging in his tuxedo. "I'll take good care of everything." The loaded meaning behind that statement wasn't lost on Elaine, who smiled thinly in response. "I'm sure you will." Richard made a show of reviewing the schedule with Maria, standing close enough that their arms occasionally brushed. Casual contact that appeared innocent to the children, but communicated intimate familiarity to Elaine's observant eye. The performance disgusted her, this pretense of professional interaction layered over sordid betrayal. At 6:45 p.m., Elaine and Richard left for the gala in his Range Rover, the first heavy raindrops beginning to fall as they pulled out of the driveway. Lightning illuminated the neighborhood in staccato flashes, followed by increasingly assertive thunder. The storm was intensifying, just as the meteorologists had predicted and Elaine had hoped. "Perfect night to stay indoors," Richard commented, as he navigated through the worsening weather. "The kids will love watching movies with Maria during a thunderstorm." "I'm sure they will," Elaine agreed, staring straight ahead at the rain-slicked road. Everyone will be exactly where they're supposed to be tonight. The Westbrook Foundation Gala was held at the Hawthorne Hotel, a historic property renowned for its elegant ballroom and impeccable service. Despite the weather, attendance was robust. Over 300 of the region's wealthiest and most influential citizens gathered in designer evening wear, sipping champagne and bidding on silent auction items. Elaine and Richard moved through, the crowd with practiced social grace, accepting compliments on her dramatic black gown and his distinguished appearance. They separated occasionally to greet different colleagues and acquaintances, Richard predictably gravitating toward potential business connections, while Elaine engaged with fellow corporate executives. At 8:30 p.m. during dinner, Elaine excused herself to use the restroom. Instead of returning directly to the ballroom, she slipped out a side exit to the hotel's covered parking area. The rain was now torrential, providing excellent cover as she retrieved an item from the exterior pocket of her evening clutch. A small electronic device purchased through an anonymous online account and delivered to a package service 50 miles from home. She approached their Range Rover, unlocked it with the spare key, and attached the device to the underside of the steering column, a simple but effective mechanism that would disable the vehicle's electrical system when activated by a remote trigger. Not permanently, but long enough to serve her purpose. Back inside, Elaine refreshed her lipstick in the ladies' room and returned to the gala, sliding into her seat beside Richard with an apologetic smile. "Sorry, ran into Marjorie Wilson from Eastridge Pharmaceuticals. She's interested in our new marketing strategy." Richard nodded distractedly, his attention focused on his phone beneath the table. Texting Maria, no doubt. Coordinating their plans for later in the evening, the gala proceeded according to schedule: dinner, speeches, live auction, dancing. Elaine made sure to be photographed multiple times, engaging animatedly with influential attendees and participating visibly in the charity auction. She bid aggressively on a luxury vacation package, winning it at an inflated price that guaranteed both attention and appreciation from the event organizers. At 11:15 p.m., right on cue, Richard leaned close to her. Here, during a momentary lull in the music, "The Morrison account documents are in the car. I should review them before Monday's meeting. I'll slip out for 20 minutes or so." Another transparent lie. The Morrison file didn't exist, but the 20-minute window was real, just enough time for Richard to call Maria, to exchange whispered promises for their planned rendezvous once Elaine was safely asleep. Perhaps even enough time to instruct Maria to drug Elaine's nightcap to ensure her unconsciousness. "Take your time," Elaine replied, smiling knowingly. "I'm enjoying catching up with the Prestons." Richard squeezed her shoulder in what appeared to be affectionate gratitude, but felt like patronizing manipulation. She watched him weave through the crowd toward the exit, waited exactly 3 minutes with her diamond watch, then discreetly removed the remote trigger from her clutch. One press of the innocuous button. That's all it took. When Richard returned, 20 minutes later, his expression was tightly controlled but tinged with frustration. "Car trouble," he muttered as he rejoined her. "Something electrical. I've called roadside assistance, but with this storm, they're backed up. Might be 2 hours before they can get here." "How inconvenient," Elaine remarked with precisely calibrated concern. "Should we call it a rideshare?" "Already tried. Nothing. Available for at least 40 minutes due to the weather." Richard's jaw tightened momentarily before he forced a casual tone. "We might as well enjoy the party while we wait. The Thompsons offered to drive us home if the roadside can't get to us tonight." This was fortuitous. Richard's mention of the Thompsons would corroborate Elaine's earlier fabrication about brunch plans, another piece sliding into place. By 1:30 a.m., the gala was winding down. Richard had made 3 more attempts to check on roadside assistance, each time returning with increased frustration poorly disguised as patience. Elaine maintained her sociable facade, dancing with appropriate partners and participating in conversations while mentally tracking the progression of her plan. Roadside finally showed up, Richard announced at 1:45 a.m., rejoining her after his latest absence. They can't fix it here. They need to tow it to the dealership. The Thompsons are still willing to drive us. That's very kind of them, Elaine agreed, gathering her clutch. I should thank Charlotte personally. The ride home in the Thompsons' luxury sedan provided another layer of witnesses to their movements. Robert Thompson drove cautiously through the still-pouring rain, while his wife Charlotte chatted about the gala's success from the passenger seat. In the back, Elaine and Richard maintained the appearance of a united couple, his hand resting possessively on her knee as they discussed the auction items and notable attendees. "We're still on for brunch tomorrow, right?" Charlotte asked as they approached the Harrington home. "Around 11? "Looking forward to it," Elaine confirmed smoothly, cementing the fabricated plans in the Thompsons' memory. "We'll just need to make sure Maria can stay with the kids." Richard's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on her knee. A warning, not to mention Maria by name, perhaps, or tension at the reminder of arrangements that needed adjustment. The Harrington house was mostly dark as they approached, with only security lights illuminating the rain-drenched driveway. Robert Thompson pulled up to the front entrance to shield them from the downpour. "Thank you again for the ride," Richard said, shaking Robert's hand firmly. "We'll see you tomorrow morning." Inside, the house was silent, except for the rhythmic pounding of rain against the windows. A small lamp burned in the living room, where Maria had presumably been waiting for their return. A romance novel lay open on the side table, a half-empty glass of wine beside it. "Maria?" Richard called softly, moving through the darkened house toward the kitchen. "We're home." Elaine set her clutch on the entryway table and slipped off her heels, listening to Richard's footsteps as he checked the kitchen, then moved toward the family room. She followed at a distance, her stockinged feet silent on the hardwood floors. In the family room, Maria was curled on the sectional sofa, apparently asleep beneath a lightweight throw blanket. Richard approached her and gently touched her shoulder. "Maria," he whispered, "wake up." The young woman stirred, blinking up at him in momentary confusion before recognition dawned. "Mr. Harrington, you're back." She sat up quickly, glancing, and passed him to where Elaine stood in the doorway. "I didn't expect you so soon. The children are all asleep." "Car trouble," Richard explained, stepping back to maintain appropriate distance now that Elaine was present. "The Thompsons gave us a ride. And home. I'll just check on the children," Elaine announced, turning toward the staircase. "Maria, would you like some tea before bed? You must be tired after watching the kids all evening." "Oh, that's very kind, Mrs. Harrington." Maria's surprise at the offer was evident. "Tea would be nice." "Richard, would you mind starting the kettle while I check on the children? I want to make sure Sophie took her medication." It was a calculated request, separating them briefly while establishing benign intentions. Richard nodded, already moving toward the kitchen with Maria following at a careful distance. Upstairs, Elaine did indeed look in on each child, taking a moment to absorb their peaceful, sleeping faces. Tyler sprawled across his bed, one arm dangling. Toward the floor, headphones still positioned around his neck. Emma lay curled on her side, her chemistry textbook open beside her pillow. And little Sophie, surrounded by stuffed animals, her thumb partially in her mouth despite having officially outgrown the habit. Elaine tucked blankets more securely, removed Emma's book, adjusted Sophie's favorite unicorn closer to her chest. Each action felt ceremonial, infused with silent promises that tomorrow would secure their futures against betrayal and abandonment. In her bedroom, Elaine quickly changed from her gown into casual clothes, yoga pants, and a lightweight sweater, clothes that allowed freedom of movement. From the back of her closet, she retrieved the gym bag and removed the items she would need immediately, concealing them in the pockets of her sweater before returning the bag to its hiding place. Downstairs, Richard and Maria were in the kitchen, standing noticeably apart from each other as the kettle began to whistle. Their postures were stiff, unnaturally formal, a performance of employer and employee that might have fooled someone who hadn't witnessed their passionate embrace in this very room. "Everyone's sleeping soundly," Elaine announced as she entered. "The storm didn't wake them." "I gave Sophie her medication at 7:30, just as you asked," Maria reported. "Tyler finished his history project, and Emma studied for her chemistry test until about 10. "Thank you, Maria. You're always so thorough." Elaine moved to the cabinet and selected 3 mugs. "Richard, would you mind getting the tea from the pantry? The chamomile is on the 2nd shelf." As Richard turned away, Elaine's hand moved swiftly to her pocket, withdrawing the mint tin. With practiced efficiency from years of preparing pharmaceutical samples, she tapped the powdered medication into 2 of the mugs, Richard's preferred black ceramic and the floral guest mug Maria always used. "I was thinking we could all use something a bit stronger than tea after such a long day," Richard suggested as he returned with the tea. "I could open a bottle of wine." "Perfect," Elaine agreed, watching him closely. "The cabinet could use tidying. Anyway, I'll finish the tea." As Richard moved to the wine refrigerator in the butler's pantry, Elaine quickly poured hot water into the 3 mugs, stirring each thoroughly to dissolve any residual powder. By the time Richard returned with an open bottle of Cabernet, the tea was steeping innocently on the counter. "I've set up the guest room for you, Maria," Elaine said, handing her the floral mug. "Though it seems silly for you to sleep there. When we'll be out again tomorrow morning, the Thompsons invited us for brunch." "Oh." Maria looked momentarily confused, obviously aware of no such plans from her previous communications with Richard. "Well, I'm happy to stay as long as needed." "We appreciate that," Richard interjected, accepting his black mug from Elaine. "The gala ran later than expected, but these events are important for business connections." They moved to the family room, an awkward triangle of forced conversation. Elaine sipped her untainted tea while watching Richard and Maria consume theirs. Between careful comments about the children, the storm, the charity event, when Richard opened the wine, Elaine accepted a glass, but merely pretended to drink, keeping track of how much the others consumed. The sleeping medication worked quickly, especially combined with alcohol. Within 20 minutes, both Richard and Maria were fighting to keep their eyes open, their speech becoming increasingly slurred. "Perhaps we should all get some rest," Elaine suggested, rising from her seat. "It's nearly 3 in the morning." "Yes, you're right," Richard agreed, his movements sluggish as he stood. "I'll just lock up downstairs." "I've already set the alarm," Elaine assured him. "Maria, let me show you to the guest room." Richard swayed slightly as he watched them leave the room, his drugged mind clearly struggling to process the disruption to whatever plans he had made with Maria for the night. By the time Elaine returned from escorting a barely conscious Maria to the guest room, Richard had collapsed onto the sofa, succumbing completely to the medication. Elaine stood over him for a long moment, studying the face that had once represented her future. Handsome features now slack with pharmaceutical-induced sleep, 15 years of marriage, 3 children, countless sacrifices made to build a life he had been willing to destroy for momentary pleasure. With methodical calm, she returned to the kitchen and donned the pharmaceutical-grade gloves. From her pocket, she withdrew the hunting knife, still in its retail packaging. She removed it carefully, handling it by the hilt to avoid leaving fingerprints on the blade. Then she returned to the family room, to her unconscious husband, to the irreversible step that would transform theory into action. The storm continued to rage outside, thunder masking any sounds from within the Harrington home, as Elaine's carefully constructed plan entered its final, bloody phase. The kitchen clock read 3:17 a.m. when Elaine Harrington finished cleaning the hunting knife under scalding water. She worked methodically, ensuring no trace of biological material remained on the blade or handle. The pharmaceutical-grade gloves protected her hands not only from evidence transfer, but also from the near-boiling temperature of the water, a professional habit of thoroughness applied to this most unprofessional act. Thunder continued to roll outside, less frequent now, but still powerful enough to rattle the kitchen windows. The storm was moving eastward, trailing behind it a silence that would soon envelop the Harrington home completely. Elaine dried the knife and returned it to its original packaging, which she then sealed in a plastic evidence bag, the kind used in pharmaceutical trials to preserve chain of custody. This, along with the gloves and the clothes she now wore, would be disposed of at 5 separate locations during her carefully planned route tomorrow. The evidence would be scattered across county lines, some of it weighted and dropped into bodies of water, the rest incinerated in isolated fire pits she had previously identified via satellite imagery. Her hands were steady as she filled a glass with water and leaned against the counter to drink it. No tremors, no physical manifestation of the enormity of what had just transpired in the family room and guest bedroom. Her pulse remained even, her breathing regulated. The clinical detachment that had made her successful in corporate pharmaceutical sales served her equally well in this extreme divergence from societal norms. The water tasted metallic, or perhaps that was the lingering scent of blood in her nostrils affecting her perception. She rinsed the glass twice, then placed it in the dishwasher alongside the mugs that had contained the drugged tea. The dishwasher would run on a sanitized cycle before dawn, eliminating any trace of the powdered medication. Upstairs, Elaine checked on her children once more, still sleeping peacefully, unaware that their lives had irrevocably changed in the past 40 minutes. Sophie had kicked off her blanket. Elaine gently replaced it, smoothing the unicorn pattern over her daughter's small shoulders. The gesture was tender, at odds with the calculated violence she had just executed downstairs. In the master bathroom, Elaine showered methodically, watching as invisible molecules of evidence circled the drain. She shampooed twice, conditioned, exfoliated with clinical precision. No physical trace could remain on her body. When she finished, she dressed in fresh pajamas and applied her usual nighttime moisturizer in front of the vanity mirror. The woman reflected back appeared unchanged. The same angular features, the same professionally highlighted hair, the same focused eyes. Yet something fundamental had shifted behind that familiar facade. The Elaine who had entered the family room with a hunting knife was not the same Elaine who now prepared for the performance of her life. At 4:05 a.m., she settled into bed with her laptop, creating the digital footprint that would support her narrative. She sent emails to colleagues about upcoming presentations, responded to Tyler's basketball coach about tournament schedules, ordered groceries for delivery on Monday. Normal activities that established her routine and showed no disruption to her patterns. Then she cleared her browser history, closed the laptop, and set her alarm for 7:30 a.m., late enough to suggest she had slept soundly through the night, early enough to maintain her reputation for productivity even on Sundays. Sleep did not come, nor had she expected it to. Instead, Elaine lay in the dark, reviewing each element of her plan, identifying potential vulnerabilities and mentally rehearsing her responses to the questions that would inevitably arise. By the time her alarm sounded, she had constructed an impenetrable narrative supported by physical evidence, digital timestamps, and credible witnesses, all orchestrated over weeks of meticulous planning. The first scream came at 7:43 a.m., piercing the morning quiet with such primal horror that birds scattered from the oak tree outside Elaine's window. It was Tyler, his deep voice cracking as he discovered the scene in the family room upon descending for his usual Sunday morning protein shake. Elaine bolted upright in bed, her expression a carefully crafted mask of confusion and alarm. She grabbed her robe and rushed downstairs, calling her son's name with convincing panic. The family room presented exactly the tableau she had arranged hours earlier. Richard remained on the sofa, now surrounded by a substantial pool of dried blood. The hunting knife protruded from his chest at precisely the angle that suggested a frenzied emotional attack rather than the calculated strike it had actually been. His eyes were open, fixed in an expression of shocked betrayal that would support the narrative of unexpected violence. Tyler stood frozen in the doorway, his athletic frame trembling violently as he stared at his father's corpse. When Elaine reached him, he turned and vomited onto the hardwood floor, his body rejecting the horrific visual input. "Tyler, what's—" Elaine's practiced question cut off as she deliberately allowed her gaze to land on Richard's body. The gasp that escaped her lips was theatrical yet wholly convincing. "Oh my God, Richard!" She lunged forward as if to reach her husband, allowing Tyler to catch her before she could contaminate the crime scene. Her knees buckled with calculated timing, her weight forcing her son to support her physically just as she had supported their family emotionally for years. Dad's... Tyler couldn't form complete sentences, shock fracturing his typical teenage bravado. "Call 911!" Elaine commanded, her voice cracking appropriately. "Now, Tyler, get help!" As Tyler fumbled for his phone, Elaine's performance shifted to the next phase. She suddenly straightened, maternal instinct ostensibly overriding personal shock. "The girls. We need to keep the girls upstairs. They can't see this." Tyler nodded frantically, grateful for direction amid chaos. I'll call 911 and then stand at the stairs. Keep them up there." "Yes, good thinking." Elaine squeezed his arm. "Hurry, Tyler. And Maria. Oh God, where's Maria?" She was in the guest room. The momentary confusion on Tyler's face confirmed he hadn't yet discovered the second body. Perfect. The narrative would unfold exactly as Elaine had choreographed. While Tyler made the 911 call from the kitchen, his voice breaking as he reported, finding his father murdered, Elaine pretended to check for Richard's pulse. She positioned herself to avoid disrupting the blood pattern while making it appear she had attempted revival. Her anguished sobs were perfectly calibrated, loud enough to convey devastation, but not so hysterical as to suggest performance. By the time Tyler returned, Elaine had moved to the floor beside the sofa, her bathrobe strategically stained with her husband's blood from apparently cradling him. "He's gone," she whispered. "He's really gone. Police and ambulance are coming," Tyler reported mechanically, shock rendering him almost robotic. "They said not to touch anything else, to keep everyone away from Dad." The girls, Elaine, repeated, leveraging maternal concern to direct attention away from inconsistencies in the scene. "And Maria. We need to check on Maria." "I'll get Emma to watch Sophie," Tyler volunteered, clearly desperate for purposeful action. "Then I'll check the guest room." "No." Elaine's response was sharp, perhaps too sharp. She modulated her tone. "No, honey. Stay with your sisters. I need to see if Maria is okay. Maybe she heard something. Maybe she saw who did this." The calculated hesitation in her delivery conveyed both hope and dread, emotional complexity that reinforced her authenticity. Tyler nodded, relieved, to be assigned the less horrific task of managing his sisters. As her son headed upstairs, Elaine moved toward the guest room with deliberate hesitation. The door was closed exactly as she had left it after completing her work there. She knocked tentatively. Maria, are you awake? Something's happened." "Maria?" No response, as expected. She turned the handle slowly, calling Maria's name. Again, before pushing the door open to reveal the second tableau she had arranged. Maria lay across the guest bed, in a posture suggesting she had never awakened from her drugged state. The bedding beneath her was saturated with blood from the multiple stab wounds Elaine had inflicted, significantly more than Richard had received, creating a crime scene that forensics would interpret as emotionally driven, a frenzied attack consistent with jealous rage. Elaine's scream at this discovery was her finest performance, raw, guttural, wholly believable. It brought Tyler running despite his assignment to watch his sisters, Emma following close behind. "Stay back," Elaine commanded as they approached the guest room doorway. "Don't look. Go back upstairs now." But it was too late. Both teenagers had glimpsed enough of the scene to understand that Maria, too, had been murdered. Emma began to hyperventilate, her slender frame shaking uncontrollably. Tyler turned deathly pale, but managed to pull his sister away from the doorway. "Get Sophie," Elaine instructed, her voice breaking authentically. "Keep her in your room, Tyler. Don't let her come downstairs. Tell her there's been an accident and police are coming to help us." As her eldest children retreated upstairs, Elaine sank to the hallway floor outside the guest room, allowing herself to be discovered in this position of apparent shock when the first police cruisers arrived 6 minutes later. Officers Barnes and Delaney found her there, rocking slightly, murmuring incoherently, a textbook presentation of acute traumatic stress that would inhibit detailed questioning for at least the first few hours. "Mrs. Harrington." Officer Barnes approached cautiously, holstering his weapon after clearing the immediate area. "I'm Officer Barnes with Millfield Police. Can you tell me what happened here?" Elaine raised devastated eyes to him, her expression a masterful blend of confusion and horror. "I don't know. We came home from the charity gala. Everything was fine. We went to bed. Then Tyler screamed and I came downstairs and found... She gestured helplessly toward the family room, then the guest room. "Richard, Maria, someone killed them. Someone came into our home and killed them." The performance was flawless. Disjointed sentences, inconsistent verb tenses, incomplete thoughts. Classic trauma response that any experienced officer would recognize and accommodate. "Are your children safe?" Officer Delaney asked, her hand remaining near her weapon as her gaze continuously swept the surroundings. "Upstairs," Elaine managed. "All three. Tyler's watching the girls. Sophie is only 6. She doesn't know yet. I can't. How do I tell her about her father?" The raw maternal concern further cemented Elaine's portrayal of a shocked victim rather than a calculated perpetrator. Officer Barnes radioed for additional units, while Officer Delaney helped Elaine to her feet. "Let's get you somewhere to sit." "Down," Delaney suggested gently. "Is there somewhere away from—" She tactfully avoided naming the crime scenes. "The kitchen," Elaine whispered. "Please, can someone check on my children?" Within 30 minutes, the Harrington home transformed into a hive of law enforcement activity. Detective Sergeant Marcus Walsh arrived to take charge, coordinating with forensics teams, coroner's representatives, and family services officers. The efficiency of modern police response was impressive and entirely accounted for in Elaine's planning. In the kitchen, wrapped in a shock blanket provided by paramedics, Elaine answered preliminary questions with carefully calibrated inconsistency. She emphasized her confusion about the timeline, reinforcing the narrative that she had slept soundly after returning from the gala. She mentioned the car trouble, the ride home with the Thompsons, the tea before bed, all verifiable elements that established both her movements and her apparent lack of opportunity. "Mrs. Harrington, I know this is difficult," Detective Walsh said, his weathered face suggesting he'd seen similar tragedies throughout his career. "But I need to ask, can you think of anyone who would want to harm your husband or your housekeeper?" Elaine's hesitation was perfectly timed, long enough to suggest genuine consideration, short enough to avoid appearing artificial. "No, everyone loved Richard. He was successful, respected. We just attended a charity event with hundreds of people who admired him. She paused again, vulnerability crossing her features. And Maria, she was just our housekeeper. She helped with the children. Why would anyone want to hurt Maria? The slight emphasis on Maria's position established appropriate emotional distance, neither too callous nor too attached. Detective Walsh noted something in his pad before continuing. Were there any signs of forced entry? Did you hear anything during the night? Any unusual sounds, alarms, voices? No. Elaine shook her head, allowing tears to well. The storm was so loud, thunder all night. I took my sleeping pill after we got home. I was exhausted from the gala. A deliberate mention of the sleeping medication, easily verifiable through her prescription records and consistent with the toxicology findings that would eventually show residual traces in her bloodstream from her regular usage. As the questioning proceeded, Elaine maintained her role flawlessly, cooperative yet traumatized, helpful yet confused. She provided phone numbers for the Thompsons who had driven them home, mentioned Richard's roadside assistance call for the disabled Range Rover, referenced the charity gala organizers who could confirm their attendance until nearly 2 a.m. Each detail wove another strand in the protective web she had constructed around herself. By mid-morning, Elaine's mother Patricia arrived to support the family, her face ashen with shock at the situation unfolding in her daughter's perfect home. The children were brought downstairs under Patricia's supervision, while Elaine continued answering questions and providing background information to increasingly specialized investigators. Crime scene technicians worked methodically through the house, documenting blood spatter patterns, collecting fingerprints, bagging potential evidence. Elaine watched their movements peripherally, noting with clinical satisfaction that they focused on areas consistent with an external intruder's path. The rarely used rear door with its theoretically faulty alarm sensor, the hallway connecting to the family room, the guest wing where Maria had been killed. "Mrs. Harrington," Detective Walsh said, after conferring with his forensic team, "we believe this may have been a home invasion gone wrong. The alarm system shows it was armed last night, but there's an error log for the sunroom sensor. Someone with knowledge of that vulnerability could have entered without triggering the main alarm." Elaine's eyes widened with perfectly calibrated horror. "Oh God, Richard mentioned that the sensor was acting up last month. He called the security company, but they said it was just a loose connection. They didn't think it was serious enough to rush a repair." This information, entirely fabricated but impossible to disprove now that Richard was dead, shifted investigative focus exactly as Elaine had intended. The faulty sensor had actually been disconnected by Elaine herself 3 weeks earlier, creating a documented error pattern in the system logs that would support her narrative. "What about Maria?" Elaine asked suddenly, vulnerability cracking. Her voice, her family. Someone needs to notify her family. The apparent concern for her husband's mistress further reinforced Elaine's innocence. Only someone unaware of the affair would express such genuine worry for the woman's relatives. Detective Walsh assured her that officers were locating Maria's next of kin using employment records from the Harrington files. By early afternoon, preliminary forensics reports suggested a timeline consistent with Elaine's narrative. Both victims killed between 3 and 5 a.m. while the household was asleep. Richard appeared to have been attacked first, likely without waking fully from his sleep due to the presence of unexpected sedatives in his preliminary toxicology screening. Maria showed similar sedative presence, explaining why neither victim had defensive wounds despite the violence of their deaths. "Were either of them taking sleep medications that you know of?" the medical examiner asked Elaine during a brief consultation. "Richard occasionally took something for business travel," Elaine replied, furrowing her brow in apparent concentration, "but not regularly at home. And Maria, I wouldn't know. She seemed to sleep well when she stayed over, but we never discussed medications. The vague answer provided plausible deniability while acknowledging the possibility of sedative use, a careful bridge between honesty and deception that characterized Elaine's entire performance. By evening, extended family had gathered at Patricia's home, where the Harrington children were temporarily relocated for both practical and psychological reasons. Their house remained an active crime scene, with specialized teams working through the night to process evidence. Elaine stayed at her mother's as well, sleeping in the guest room while relatives took turns comforting the children. Or rather, pretending to sleep. In reality, Elaine lay awake, monitoring news coverage on her tablet, scanning local reporting for any inconsistencies in the public narrative. The double homicide had already made regional headlines. Prominent executive and housekeeper murdered in upscale community. Double homicide rocks. Millfield. Investment banker and household employee. Victims of apparent home invasion. Security system. Failure suspected in Harrington family murder. Siege headline reinforced the external intruder theory, just as Elaine had anticipated. The articles mentioned Richard's successful career, the charity gala attendance, the seemingly random targeting of an affluent home. Maria was described as a valued employee, a first-generation American working to support family members, a trusted caregiver to the Harrington children. None mentioned a possible affair. None suggested domestic motivations. The narrative was developing exactly as Elaine had orchestrated through weeks of meticulous planning and hours of flawless performance. In the darkness of her mother's guest room, surrounded by well-meaning relatives who believed her to be a shocked widow rather than a calculating killer, Elaine Harrington closed her eyes and allowed herself the first moment of genuine emotion since executing her plan. It wasn't remorse. It wasn't guilt. It was something far more primal, a cold satisfaction that she had protected what belonged to her. Her children would never shuttle between homes, never witness their father building a new family with the woman who had betrayed her trust. Her assets remained intact, her narrative controlled, her future secured through the most extreme measures imaginable. As dawn approached on Monday, bringing with it the first official day of her widowhood, Elaine finally drifted toward sleep, her last conscious thought not of the lives she had taken, but of the life she had preserved, her own, on her own terms, regardless of the blood price required. The Harrington family funeral took place on a Thursday, 5 days after the murders. The spring weather had turned appropriately somber, with grey clouds hanging low over Millfield Cemetery as hundreds of mourners gathered to pay respects. Richard's mahogany casket, adorned with white lilies and flanked by enlarged professional photographs, became the centerpiece of a community's collective grief. Elaine stood at the graveside in tailored black, her children arranged beside her like support columns for a structure threatening to collapse. Tyler, stoic in his first suit, maintained physical contact with his mother's elbow throughout the service. Emma, hollowed by shock and confusion, stared vacantly at the casket that contained her father. 6-year-old Sophie clutched a teddy bear, wearing a miniature tie like the ones her daddy wore to work, her small face crumpled with a child's unfiltered anguish. "Mrs. Harrington has requested privacy during this impossible time," Reverend Phillips announced at the conclusion of the service. "The family thanks you for your support and understanding." The statement was crafted by the crisis management team from Richard's investment firm, professionals accustomed to handling public perception during difficult transitions. They had coordinated the funeral arrangements, managed media inquiries, and established a security perimeter that kept reporters at a respectful distance from the grieving family. What these professionals didn't realize was how thoroughly Elaine had manipulated their services to further her narrative. Each carefully staged photograph selection, each meticulously worded statement, each strategically timed public appearance reinforced her position as the devastated widow rather than calculating killer. As mourners filtered away from the gravesite, Detective Walsh approached Elaine with appropriately somber restraint. "Mrs. Harrington, I'm sorry to intrude today of all days, but I wondered if we might schedule some time tomorrow to review a few developments in the investigation." Elaine turned tear-reddened eyes toward him, her expression perfectly balanced, between cooperation and fragility. "Of course, Detective. Whatever helps find who did this to Richard." A deliberate pause. "And to Maria." She had insisted on separate funeral arrangements for Maria, a gesture that appeared compassionate while strategically distancing the victims from each other in public perception. Maria's service had been held the previous day at her family's church in the neighboring city, a modest affair that Elaine had funded while declining to attend, citing emotional exhaustion and her children's needs. "Would 3 o'clock at the station be possible?" Walsh asked. "We can arrange a quiet room away from the main areas." "My mother can watch the children." Elaine nodded, her gaze drifting back to the casket being lowered into the ground. "I want to do everything I can to help." As the detective moved away, Patricia Henderson, Elaine's mother, tightened her grip on her daughter's arm. "Why do they need to question you again?" she whispered urgently. "Haven't you been through enough?" "It's standard procedure, Mom," Elaine murmured. "Detective Walsh is just being thorough." "Well, I don't like it. You're barely holding yourself together as it is." The concern in Patricia's voice was genuine, one of many emotional tethers Elaine had to navigate carefully in the aftermath of her actions. Her mother's protective instincts, while touching, created potential complications. Patricia's insistence on constant proximity limited Elaine's ability to manage certain aspects of the ongoing deception. Back at Patricia's house, where the Harrington family had temporarily relocated, a catered reception awaited the immediate family and closest friends. The gathering was subdued, hushed conversations in corners, somber reflections on Richard's life, awkward attempts to interact with the shell-shocked children. Elaine moved through the rooms with practiced grace, accepting condolences with dignified grief. She maintained physical connection with at least one child at all times, a hand on Tyler's shoulder, fingers intertwined with Emma's, Sophie balanced on her hip. The tableau of maternal devotion amid tragedy was powerful imagery that reinforced her public persona. Elaine, Andrew Kessler, Richard's closest colleague, approached with his wife beside him. "We've set up the memorial fund at the firm. It's already received substantial contributions." "That's very kind," Elaine replied, her voice appropriately subdued. Richard would be touched by everyone's generosity. "The partners are unanimous in their commitment to supporting you and the children," Andrew continued. "Whatever you need, financial guidance, legal assistance, anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask." The firm's solidarity was exactly what Elaine had anticipated. Richard's status as a rising star had made him valuable to the company's image. His violent death transformed him into a martyr whose family deserved protection. This institutional support provided an additional layer of insulation between Elaine and the investigative processes unfolding around her. "There's also the matter of Richard's life insurance," Andrew added in a lowered voice. "The firm's policy is substantial. The HR director can meet with you next week to begin the paperwork." Elaine nodded gratefully, though she was intimately familiar with the policy details. $3 million in basic coverage, plus an additional $2 million for accidental death, a financial cushion she had factored into her calculations from the beginning. Combined with their investment portfolio, real estate equity, and Richard's retirement accounts, the insurance would ensure financial security for her and the children indefinitely. As evening approached, the guests gradually departed, leaving only immediate family in Patricia's house. Emma retreated to the guest bedroom she shared with Sophie, while Tyler disappeared into the backyard, seeking solitude among the flowering dogwoods. Patricia busied herself cleaning up, despite the caterer's assurances that they would handle everything. Alone momentarily in her mother's study, Elaine accessed her secure email account, one created specifically for communications related to the aftermath. She reviewed messages from the security company about reinstalling the home system, from Richard's attorney regarding probate procedures, from the children's school counselor offering support services. Each communication represented a strand in the complex web of post-murder logistics, each requiring careful management to maintain her narrative. She responded methodically, her tone appropriately distracted and grief-stricken, while ensuring practical matters progressed according to her underlying plan. A notification appeared on her phone, a text from Detective Walsh confirming tomorrow's interview and adding a seemingly innocuous detail. "We'll be recording our conversation as standard procedure." The phrasing caught Elaine's attention. Previous interviews had been recorded without specific mention. This deliberate notification suggested a shift in the investigation's nature, perhaps toward more formal documentation for eventual case building. She set down her phone, mentally reviewing possible developments that might have triggered this change. The initial toxicology reports would be complete by now, confirming the presence of sedatives in both victims. The blood spatter analysis would have established attack vectors and timing. Fingerprint and DNA collection would have identified everyone with recent presence in the home. None of these standard procedures threatened her carefully constructed scenario. She had accounted for each scientific methodology in her planning, ensuring all physical evidence supported the external intruder narrative. What concerned her was the human element, the unpredictable variables introduced by witnesses, neighbors, acquaintances. Has someone noticed something inconsistent? Had an overlooked security camera captured movement during her active period? Had Maria communicated with someone about the affair before her death? Elaine closed her eyes, conducting another mental review of potential vulnerabilities. The sedatives might raise questions about how an intruder administered them, but the wine glasses provided a plausible delivery method. The lack of defensive wounds might seem suspicious, but the toxicology results explained the victim's inability to resist. The targeted nature of the killings might suggest personal motivation, but valuable items left untouched supported the interrupted burglary theory. Her performance remained the most critical element, maintaining consistent emotional patterns, while demonstrating the expected psychological responses to traumatic loss. So far, her portrayal had been flawless, earning sympathy from investigators rather than suspicion. "Mom?" Tyler's voice interrupted her thoughts as he appeared in the study doorway. "Sophie's asking for you. She can't fall asleep." Elaine immediately shifted into maternal mode, her features softening as she rose from the desk. "I'll go to her now. Are you doing okay? You've been so strong through all of this." Tyler shrugged, the gesture simultaneously adult and childlike. At 16, he stood at the threshold of manhood, thrust suddenly into a family role he wasn't prepared for. "I'm trying to be, for Emma and Sophie." "You don't have to be strong all the time," Elaine assured him, crossing to embrace her son. "It's okay to grieve, to be angry, to fall apart sometimes." The irony of this statement, coming from a woman who had orchestrated a double homicide with clinical detachment, didn't register as dissonance in Elaine's mind. In her compartmentalized moral framework, eliminating Richard and Maria had been necessary to protect the family unit they had threatened. The trauma her children now experienced was regrettable but temporary, a painful transition to a more secure future under her exclusive control. In the guest bedroom, Sophie lay curled, around her teddy bear, tears streaking her small face. "I want Daddy," she whimpered as Elaine settled beside her. "Why can't angels visit, just for 1 minute?" The plaintive question pierced even Elaine's fortified emotional barriers. She gathered her youngest child into her arms, rocking gently, as Sophie's body shook with sobs. "Angels have special jobs in heaven, sweetheart. Daddy can't visit, but he can watch over you from up there." The comforting lies flowed easily, constructed from cultural narratives about death that children could comprehend. Elaine stroked Sophie's hair, humming the lullaby that had soothed her since infancy, until the exhausted child finally surrendered to sleep. Across the room, Emma lay facing the wall, her body rigid with wakefulness despite pretending to sleep. At 14, she possessed enough awareness to recognize platitudes but insufficient life experience to process the violent severing of her family structure. Of the 3 children, Emma had withdrawn the most completely, speaking only when necessary and avoiding physical contact with everyone, including Elaine. This emotional distancing concerned Elaine more than Tyler's stoic functionality or Sophie's open grieving. Emma's psychological retreat represented potential instability in the family reconstruction Elaine had envisioned, a crack in the foundation that might widen under continued stress. "Emma?" Elaine whispered, receiving no response beyond a slight tensing of her daughter's shoulders. "I know you're awake. I'm here if you want to talk." The silence stretched between them, filled with unasked questions and unspoken accusations. Finally, Emma spoke without turning. "Did Dad suffer?" The query's unexpected specificity momentarily disrupted Elaine's practiced responses. She hesitated before crafting an answer that balanced emotional comfort against potential forensic contradictions. "The police believe he was asleep," she said softly. "He wouldn't have known what was happening." Technically accurate, the sedatives had ensured Richard's diminished consciousness, while omitting the critical detail of who had ensured that state. "And Maria?" Emma continued, still facing away. "Was she asleep, too?" Elaine's maternal instinct warned of dangerous territory. Emma's focus on the victim's experience suggested either simple trauma processing or something more concerning, nascent suspicion about inconsistencies in the official narrative. "The detective told me both Richard and Maria had sleep medication in their systems," Elaine explained carefully. "They believe whoever broke in may have put something in their drinks first." "Like what? How would a random burglar know what to use or how much?" The question revealed concerning analytical abilities in her teenage daughter, connections Elaine couldn't afford to have explored further. She redirected gently but firmly. "The police think it might have been someone with medical knowledge. They're investigating all possibilities." Elaine shifted tactics, introducing emotional distraction. "Emma, I know this is overwhelming. I'm worried about how you're processing everything." "I'm fine," Emma stated flatly. "You're not fine. None of us is fine." Elaine infused her voice with carefully calibrated vulnerability. "I'm barely holding myself together, Emma. I need to know you're not shutting me out completely." The strategic display of maternal weakness achieved its purpose. Emma finally turned, her expression softening slightly. "I'm not shutting you out. I just can't make it make sense." "Neither can I," Elaine agreed, extending her hand across the space between them. After a moment's hesitation, Emma took it, the first voluntary physical contact she'd initiated since the murders. The small victory stabilized one immediate concern, but Emma's analytical questioning reinforced the need for vigilance. Elaine made a mental note to arrange additional therapy sessions for her middle child, ostensibly for grief processing, but strategically for emotional management by a credentialed professional who would reinforce the accidental trauma narrative. Rather than exploring alternative explanations, The Millfield Police Department occupied a modern building at the edge of the commercial district, its architecture balancing authority with community accessibility. Detective Walsh met Elaine in the lobby at precisely 3 o'clock, escorting her to an interview room designed for sensitive conversations rather than suspect interrogations. Comfortable chairs, natural lighting, absence of obvious recording equipment. "Thank you for coming in, Mrs. Harrington," Walsh began once they were seated. "How are the children holding up?" "As well as can be expected," Elaine replied, the strain evident in her voice. "Sophie doesn't fully understand the permanence. Tyler's, trying to be the man of the house. And Emma," she hesitated, "Emma's withdrawing. The therapist says it's a normal response to trauma, but I'm worried about her." The personal detail served dual purposes, establishing Elaine's primary concern as maternal rather than self-protective, while preemptively addressing Emma's potential behavioral anomalies that might otherwise trigger investigative interest. "That's understandable," Walsh nodded sympathetically. "Adolescents process grief differently. We can put you in touch with additional resources if needed." "Thank you. That would be helpful." Walsh activated the recording device, stating the date, time, and participants for the record. "Mrs. Harrington, we've completed preliminary forensic analysis of the crime scene, and I'd like to review some findings with you to see if they suggest anything meaningful from your perspective." Elaine nodded, her expression appropriately apprehensive yet cooperative. "Our technical team confirmed the security system vulnerability you mentioned. The sunroom sensor showed intermittent failure over the 3 weeks preceding the incident. Records from the security company verify a service call was scheduled but hadn't yet been completed. This confirmation of her manufactured evidence trial provided reassurance that the physical aspects of her plan remained solid. The actual sensor tampering, subtle disconnection of internal wiring that created electrical irregularities, had been performed with sufficient expertise to appear as component degradation rather than deliberate sabotage. Richard mentioned it several times, Elaine offered, reinforcing the narrative. He was frustrated that they couldn't send someone sooner. Walsh made a note before continuing. The toxicology reports show both victims had significant levels of zolpidem in their systems, a prescription sleep medication. Richard occasionally took something for insomnia during business trips, Elaine confirmed, repeating her earlier statement for consistency. But I didn't know Maria used sleep aids. The concentrations were unusually high, Walsh noted, watching her reaction carefully. Higher than standard therapeutic dosing. Elaine allowed appropriate confusion to cross. Her features, what does that mean? We are considering the possibility that the intruder may have administered additional medication to ensure the victims remained unconscious during the robbery attempt. The wine glasses in the family room tested positive for zolpidem residue. So someone put sleeping pills in their wine? Elaine's voice wavered with calculated distress. While we were all in the house. That's one theory we're exploring, Walsh confirmed. Did you have wine that evening as well? I had a glass earlier, but not with Richard and Maria after the gala. I was exhausted from the event and took my usual prescription sleeping pill instead. The medical records she had established over the previous year documented her legitimate zolpidem prescription, creating a perfect explanation for any traces that might appear in her toxicology screening. You mentioned in earlier interviews that you didn't hear anything unusual during the night, Walsh continued. No sounds of struggle or disturbance? Nothing. Between the storm, my exhaustion from the gala, and my sleeping medication, I was completely out until Tyler screamed the next morning. Elaine wrapped her arms around herself, a physical manifestation of psychological vulnerability. I keep thinking, if I had just woken up, if I had heard something. Self-recrimination is common among survivors, Mrs. Harrington, but nothing suggests you could have prevented what happened even if you had awakened. Walsh's reassurance carried the practiced tone of an experienced detective who had counseled many traumatized witnesses. The evidence indicates the perpetrator was methodical and prepared. The irony of this assessment, accurately describing Elaine herself, rather than a fictional intruder, might have amused her under different circumstances. Instead, she nodded gratefully at Walsh's attempt to alleviate misplaced guilt. There is one aspect of the crime scene analysis I wanted to discuss specifically, Walsh continued, his tone shifting subtly. The attack patterns on the two victims show significant differences in force application and sequencing. This observation represented the first potential crack in Elaine's narrative, a forensic detail she had considered but couldn't fully control due to the physical limitations of staging. The different emotional states she had simulated through wound patterns might appear inconsistent with a single perpetrator. "I don't understand," she said, allowing genuine unease to color her response. "The injuries to Mr. Harrington suggest a controlled, almost surgical approach, precise wounds with minimal peripheral damage. The injuries to Ms. Delgado, however, show signs of frenzied emotional infliction, excessive force, pattern inconsistency, overkill characteristics." Elaine paled naturally, not from fear of discovery, but from the clinical description of violence she had indeed inflicted differently on each victim. She had calculated the distinct patterns deliberately, intending to suggest emotional motivation. In Maria's murder versus opportunistic elimination in Richard's death. "That's horrible," she whispered, turning her face away. "Why would someone treat them so differently?" Walsh leaned forward slightly. "We're considering whether the perpetrator might have had different relationships with or reactions to each victim. The evidence suggests personal motivation rather than random opportunity, particularly regarding Ms. Delgado. The investigative focus on Maria rather than Richard aligned perfectly with Elaine's strategy. By creating a more emotionally charged crime scene in the guest room, she had directed suspicion toward Maria as the primary target, potentially leading investigators toward Maria's personal connections rather than the Harrington family dynamic. "Maria was very private about her personal life," Elaine offered, planting seeds for alternative suspects. "She mentioned a difficult relationship with an ex-boyfriend last year, but I don't know the details. She seemed to have moved past it." Walsh documented this information with increased interest, exactly the reaction Elaine had intended. "Do you recall a name or any identifying information about this individual?" "I think his name was Carlos, or Carlos something," Elaine replied, inventing details that would be difficult to either verify or conclusively disprove. "Maria mentioned he had trouble accepting their breakup, but that was months ago, and she never brought it up again." The fictional ex-boyfriend represented a calculated risk, introducing a potential suspect who might eventually be determined not to exist. However, the investigation required to eliminate this possibility would consume resources and time, diverting attention from scrutiny of the Harrington family dynamics. After 90 minutes of detailed questioning, Detective Walsh concluded the interview with a standard request for ongoing cooperation. "If you remember anything else, no matter how insignificant it might seem, please contact me immediately." "Of course," Elaine agreed, gathering her purse with the weary movements of a woman fundamentally altered by trauma. "Will you let me know if there are any meaningful developments? The children need closure. We all do." "Absolutely," Walsh assured her, walking her toward the lobby. "And Mrs. Harrington? Consider accepting those additional therapy resources for Emma. Adolescents sometimes develop complex responses to violent loss." The detective's concern for her daughter registered as both genuine and potentially problematic. Emma's psychological state and any inconsistent perception she might express to a therapist represented a vulnerability in Elaine's carefully constructed aftermath. As she drove away from the police station, Elaine's mind shifted from performance to strategic planning. Emma required careful handling, supportive yet controlled therapy with a professional who would interpret analytical questioning as normal grief processing rather than legitimate suspicion. The investigation appeared to be proceeding along her planned trajectory, focusing on external perpetrators rather than family dynamics. The fictional ex-boyfriend would create investigative distraction. The forensic evidence supported her intruder narrative. Yet something in Detective Walsh's demeanor during their latest interview suggested an evolving perspective. Not suspicion directed at her specifically, but a methodical refinement of investigative focus that might eventually identify inconsistencies in the accepted scenario. For the first time since executing her plan, Elaine acknowledged the possibility that her performance, however flawless, might not withstand indefinite scrutiny. The understanding didn't trigger panic, but rather activated the same analytical problem-solving that had characterized her professional success and her recent transition to calculated killer. If the narrative began to unravel, adjustments would be required. Contingencies would need implementation. The children's perceptions would require management, and Detective Walsh, with his increasingly perceptive questioning, might need to be addressed directly if he ventured too close to the truth Elaine had buried beneath layers of meticulous deception. 3 weeks after the funeral, Elaine Harrington stood in the foyer of her home, keys in hand, absorbing the stillness. The crime scene cleanup specialists had done their work with professional efficiency. New flooring in the family room, fresh paint in the guest bedroom, furniture strategically rearranged to disrupt memory pathways. No physical traces remained of what had occurred that stormy night. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Patricia asked, hovering anxiously beside the packed SUV in the driveway. "The children could stay with me another week. There's no rush. We need to reclaim our home," Elaine replied, with practiced conviction. The therapist said establishing new routines is essential for the children's recovery. Tyler carried boxes from the car, his movements mechanical as he navigated the space, where he discovered his father's body. Emma lingered on the front steps, reluctance evident in her rigid posture. Only Sophie showed anything resembling enthusiasm, running to her bedroom to check on toys left behind during their hasty departure. The return represented a calculated risk, balancing psychological necessity against investigative vulnerability. Remaining at Patricia's house any longer would suggest abnormal avoidance, potentially triggering renewed police interest. Yet reoccupying the crime scene created daily exposure to physical triggers that might impact the children's emotional stability, particularly Emma's increasingly concerning behavior. "I've prepared dinner," Patricia announced following Tyler inside, "and I've stocked the refrigerator for the week. I can stay tonight if you'd like." "That's not necessary, Mom," Elaine assured her. "We need to start functioning as a family unit again." The phrasing was deliberate, establishing the new normal of a mother-headed household rather than dwelling on the absence of Richard and Maria. Elaine had already begun restructuring family narratives through careful language choices, subtle reinforcement of remaining bonds, and strategic editing of Richard's presence in daily references. As Patricia departed with obvious reluctance, Detective Walsh's unmarked car pulled into the driveway. The timing wasn't coincidental. Elaine had informed the department of their planned return date, anticipating this monitoring visit. "Mrs. Harrington," Walsh greeted her on the front steps, nodding respectfully to Emma, who retreated inside without acknowledging him. "I wanted to check how you're settling in and provide an investigation update." "That's thoughtful of you," Elaine replied, gesturing toward the patio furniture, neutral territory, rather than the interior spaces still psychologically contaminated for both of them. The children are adjusting gradually. Once seated, Walsh reviewed recent developments with professional detachment. Forensics completed the final blood pattern analysis. The evidence confirms separate attack events rather than simultaneous assaults. Mr. Harrington was killed first, then Ms. Delgado. Elaine nodded, having deliberately staged this sequence. Does that tell you anything helpful about the perpetrator? Potentially. It suggests premeditation rather than panic. The intruder moved purposefully between victims. Walsh hesitated before continuing. We've investigated the ex-boyfriend angle you mentioned. Maria Delgado's family and friends have no knowledge of anyone named Carlos or any significant relationship in the past year. The subtle shift in Walsh's tone confirmed what Elaine had anticipated. Her diversionary tactic had been discovered. She allowed appropriate confusion to cross her features. That's strange. I distinctly remember her mentioning someone, though perhaps I misremembered the name. She frowned thoughtfully. There was definitely someone she'd broken up with, but maybe it was longer ago than I recalled. Walsh studied her with the neutral expression of an experienced investigator, revealing nothing while absorbing everything. Memory can be unreliable during traumatic periods. We're pursuing other avenues of investigation. The conversation continued with practiced civility, Walsh providing enough information to appear transparent while clearly withholding significant elements. Elaine expressing appropriate interest while avoiding excessive curiosity that might suggest ulterior motives. As Walsh prepared to leave, he mentioned casually, "Your daughter Emma had some interesting questions during her counseling session yesterday. The therapist mentioned she's struggling with certain inconsistencies in her understanding of events." The statement sent a chill through Elaine, despite her external composure. The therapy sessions, mandated by victim services and theoretically confidential, had apparently generated information significant enough for the therapist to contact investigators. "She's having trouble processing everything," Elaine acknowledged cautiously. The therapist mentioned it's common for adolescents to seek logical patterns when faced with senseless violence. "Of course," Walsh agreed, though his eyes remained evaluative. Still, children often notice details adults overlook. Sometimes their perspectives prove valuable to investigations. The implication was clear. Emma had said something concerning enough to warrant police follow-up. Elaine maintained her composure through the remainder of Walsh's departure, then moved purposefully into the house to address this emerging threat. She found Emma in her bedroom, surrounded by untouched boxes, staring blankly at her phone. "Detective, Walsh mentioned you had a good session with Dr. Bennett yesterday," Elaine began carefully, sitting on the edge of the bed. Emma's eyes narrowed slightly. "Why would he tell you that? Those sessions are supposed to be private." He didn't share specifics, just that you're asking thoughtful questions as part of your healing process. Elaine modulated her tone to project maternal concern rather than interrogation. "I'm glad you're talking to someone, even if you don't feel comfortable talking to me right now." "I asked about the sleeping pills," Emma stated flatly, watching her mother's reaction with unsettling intensity. How a random burglar would know what to use, how much to give them, it doesn't make sense. The directness of the challenge momentarily disrupted Elaine's planned approach. She recalibrated quickly, drawing on her pharmaceutical expertise to provide a plausible explanation. The detective mentioned they're considering someone with medical knowledge, perhaps a burglar who specifically targets homes of medical professionals. She reached for her daughter's hand, which Emma reluctantly permitted. "I understand needing things to make sense, Emma. I'm struggling with that too." "Dad never took sleeping pills at home," Emma continued, her gaze unwavering. "He said they made him feel groggy the next day, but the police said both he and Maria had them in their system. The specific knowledge of Richard's habits represented a dangerous complication. Elaine had underestimated her daughter's observational acuity and memory for such details. Grief can make us forget things or remember them differently. Elaine suggested gently, "Your father might have made an exception after such a long evening at the gala." "Maybe." Emma withdrew her hand, turning back to her phone. "Dr. Bennett says I should focus on healing instead of trying to solve a mystery, that it's normal to look for explanations when terrible things happen randomly." "Dr. Bennett sounds very wise," Elaine affirmed, internally resolving to speak with the therapist about directing Emma's sessions away from forensic questioning and toward emotional processing. "Would you like help unpacking? We could rearrange your room if you want, make it feel new." The conversation shifted to safer territory, though Elaine remained acutely aware of the danger Emma's analytical mind represented. Unlike Sophie's simplistic grief or Tyler's stoic acceptance, Emma's need to understand created vulnerability in Elaine's carefully constructed narrative. That evening, after the children were asleep, Elaine sat in Richard's former home office, methodically reviewing financial documents. The initial insurance payment had arrived, $3 million transferred directly to her account, with the additional accidental death benefit pending final police determination. Richard's investment accounts had been transitioned to her control. The mortgage insurance had paid off their home entirely. The financial security she had killed for was taking concrete form, providing the foundation for her family's future. Yet Emma's questions and Walsh's subtle shift in investigative approach suggested the narrative was not as stable as she had planned. Elaine opened her laptop, accessing a secured email account to send a pre-drafted message to her attorney. The content appeared innocent, questions about estate processing and children's trust establishment, but contained coded phrasing requesting preparation of contingency documents. If investigation pressure increased, certain assets would need strategic relocation to protect them from potential future challenges. As she worked, a notification appeared on her phone, a text from Patricia. "Emma called me with strange questions. About the night of the murders, should I be concerned? The development triggered not panic, but accelerated planning. Emma's expanding investigation beyond approved channels represented an escalation requiring immediate intervention." Elaine responded with reassurance to her mother while mentally drafting the next phase of narrative management. The morning would bring a carefully orchestrated conversation with Emma's therapist, suggesting anxiety medication to help her stop ruminating on unanswerable questions. A call to the children's school would arrange extended compassionate absence, creating an opportunity for a healing trip to Patricia's lake house, remote enough to limit Emma's external communications while Elaine reinforced the official narrative. Through intensive family bonding, Detective Walsh would require management as well, perhaps through strategic revelation of Richard's previously undisclosed financial improprieties, creating alternative motivations for targeted violence that directed investigation toward his professional connections. As Elaine finalized these adjustments to her plan, she acknowledged the irony of her situation. The murder of her husband and his lover had been executed with flawless precision, yet the greatest threat to her freedom came not from forensic evidence or police procedure, but from the perceptive mind of her own daughter, the very child she had killed to protect. The realization didn't trigger remorse or reconsideration. Instead, it reinforced her conviction that controlling the narrative required absolute commitment to the path she had chosen. Emma's questions, Walsh's suspicions, potential evidential inconsistencies, all were simply obstacles to be managed with the same clinical detachment she had applied to planning the murders themselves. In the darkness of the home where she had orchestrated 2 deaths, Elaine Harrington began formulating new strategies to preserve the life she had reclaimed through blood. Her capacity for calculation remained undiminished, her moral compartmentalization intact, her determination to protect what she considered hers as powerful as the night she had driven a hunting knife into her husband's chest. The perfect wife and mother had become the perfect killer. Now she would need to become the perfect deceiver to ensure her family never discovered the lengths to which she had gone to keep them exclusively hers. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.